Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we are finishing off our programming principles series with an absolute belter. Well, they're all belters, I guess, aren't they? But today we're diving deep and giving you 5 easy steps to program for yourself. So considerations and things you might want to be thinking about when you're programming for yourself, whether you're at home, you have access to all the kit, whatever your goal, and so forth. Now, quick caveat early doors. We're all individual little butterflies with our own little goals, so we're all going to be very different on the ways we might want to do things, but this is just a nice quick overview giving you ideas to make sure you're taking into consideration when you are looking to program for yourself. So Ash, step number 1, I guess, reflects already straight back to episode 1 of programming principles, and that'll be know your goal.
Spot on. So, something we keep banging on about throughout the series on the podcast. Just everything comes back to what's your intended outcome. So we go into a deep dive on that in Programming Principles 1, where we go through this SMART goal setting process, and you've got to understand what your goal is and maybe a bit of why you're doing it. But for the program design and writing, just a clear understanding of what the goal is and what you're working towards is definitely number 1 in our 5-step process.
Yeah, so if you haven't had a listen to it, do go back to listen to episode 1. We really broke it down because it's so important to take you to the next step to make sure that you're ticking off these boxes. Use this as a little checklist. Number 1, what's your goal? Tick that off. So we're going to swiftly move into number 2, which is then understanding what main lifts complement your goal and exactly what you want. So where do you go from here?
Yeah, so once you know what your goal is and what you need to do, picking your movements is the first thing I would do when writing somebody's program. Like, what are the component parts of that goal? If it's a GPP program looking for general physical preparedness, focusing on the main big lifts, main big compounds is a good starting point. So fundamental human movement patterns like squat, hinge, push, pull, rotation, and carry. And we had a quick chat about this before we started the podcast because Rob's a big fan of the carries and locomotive movements. And actually, I'm almost contradicting myself now, but I think that the locomotive movement patterns are the most functional for every person who lives a relatively normal life. Moving your body from A to P, maybe 80.
That's a long way.
Yeah. So that's where we're going to get to. Moving your body from A to B is what you do more than anything else. Even if it's just around the house, you're still locomoting. So the carries, like walking lunges, obviously, I'm always going to advocate lunges, but that has the most carryover to the majority of most people's lives. And, squat, hinge, push, pull, rotation, they are fundamental movement patterns, but you probably use them less often than walking and getting strong and robust in those transportation processes, I think is key for everybody.
Yeah, so I just want to also add in a little bit there so push, pull, hinge, squat, rotation and locomotion were those 6 points that we said. Now, when we've put in rotation, that is mainly because we're looking for that trunk work. So obviously within that rotation, you obviously have got things like isometric holds, you've got, anti-rotation, you've got other things within that. But a lot of the time, you're kind of going to get a lot of those stimuluses from, say, a big compound lift, like, say, a squat or a deadlift, and you're already going to get that isometric hold. So they're making sure you've done a rotation because day to day, we rotate a lot, but we don't rotate a lot in training. A lot of it is just up and down, maybe forwards and backwards if you're lucky. So that rotation part is a missing key a lot of time in a lot of people's training. So do make sure you've taken that into consideration. If you don't know, have a little look at your own training at the moment and see, am I doing any rotation? And don't then go and add rotation to every session. Maybe add in a bit of rotation on one day and maybe some anti-rotation in another day. So for number 3, we can kind of go back to episode 2, where we then started talking about you got to understand first of all, you got to understand how many days you can train, and also like what your maximum recoverable volume is, and also your maximum effective volume, and the amount of time that you have. So, Ash.
Yeah, exactly. So once you know the movements you need in your training program, you've got to then fit them into a pragmatic schedule, because obviously there's if you want to do a full CrossFit training program, there's about 50 different standard movements in CrossFit, but you're only doing one session a week. That's going to be quite a long session if you're going to do 50 different movements, and it's probably a bit unrealistic. So based on the time constraints you have in your week, how can you fit those movements in a way that means you're going to get a meaningful stimulus to actually improve on those movements? So if we have those 6 key components that we just talked about, and you're training 6 days a week, maybe you have 1 day a week that you're focusing on that movement and minoring on the other ones. That's the sort of consideration you need to have. But how can you fit the requirements into the constraints of your day-to-day life? And I think something that doesn't often get considered is like what days you do what. Obviously, you don't want to do the same thing. If you're overloading a movement pattern, you don't necessarily want to do it 2 days in a row. But you should also consider, if you've got a sport that you play, if you've got a football match, you probably don't want a really heavy leg day the day before, so you feel tired, sore, and slow when you play football. So little things like that, or when your rest day is, people often put a rest day on the weekend, but that's probably a good day to train really hard. Like Liam from PH Nutrition always says Monday is a great rest day because it's usually one of the busiest days at work. So why would you give yourself a big training stress as well if you can use that as a day to recover, and it fits better for your life schedule? Then that's a great way to write your program.
Yeah, I think a lot of people use the idea of a weekend as a rest day because it's I can just get up at a later time and stuff like that. But if you are thinking about say when to train based on and having rest days based on that, I'd ask maybe you need to look into your sleep schedule during the week, so that you're not then waiting for the weekend to have a couple of extra hours there. Mm-hmm. So then that basically so you can get your rest time, and then you also then need to take into consideration volume, which is going to take us nicely into our next point. So point number 4 has to be, once you've understood all of these points, so you've got your goal, you know what main lifts you want to be doing, you also know roughly the amount of days you're going to be doing them. Now you need to take into consideration your volume and intensity that you need to achieve this goal. So I guess if we're breaking that down, you're understanding what you've done in the past is going to be a really good indicator into how you got to now take your training to the next level. Exactly.
So this calls back to a lot of what we spoke about last episode for the sweet spot. What's the dose of training that's required to move you forwards? And if you have no idea, your training history is your biggest clue. Like, what did you used to do and how well did it go for you? Was it too much? Was it not enough? Were you making progress? And that's sort of a great starting point to pitch your volume intensity at. For example, if you used to go to CrossFit classes 4 or 5 times a week, you're doing 4 or 5 hours training a week, roughly how many sets and reps you're doing and what blend of like strength versus conditioning you were doing. And if that was going okay, then that's a great starting point. Little things to think about: if you're doing 5 hours training a week, in that class, there's probably a little bit more setup time, and pack
15
away
to
time.
20 minutes probably of faffing.
Bit of faffing and changings and briefings and stuff like that. So just be aware that if you're writing your own training program, you can probably pack a little bit more work in because you don't have that conversation time, and just be aware that you might end up doing a lot more work than you had done. So it potentially could be too much, and you might not be able to recover from it. But we go deep on training stress scores, training load, like how you quantify how much work you're doing and how intense it is. At its simplest, it's sets times reps times weight, or kilometers times speed. But one other key consideration in any training program is the rest, because obviously if you're doing the same work Like Rob was talking about last episode, he did a session where it's 6 by 1 kilometer. Was it 2 minutes rest you had?
It was 2 to 1, so whatever, well, basically
Okay.
half the rest time. So if it took me 4 minutes, I rested for 2 minutes.
Okay,
So,
yeah, exactly. So if you're doing the same kilometers at the same speed but with less rest, you're getting fitter. It's obvious to say, but you should be considering that in your program, because if you're doing 5 sets of 10 of an exercise with 1 minute's rest or 3 minutes rest, it's a very different stimulus, and you'll probably be able to do a very different amount of weight on the bar. And it's just a key way to track your progress as well, especially for a conditioning based point of view.
Yeah, and I think also just on like that volume and intensity, I guess understanding, like you touched on it there with obviously knowing your maximum recoverable volume and stuff like that. That's going to be so essential, because when you're then planning the days, so going back to the step before, when you're planning the days and the exercises and where to put them on certain days, you already know, say, how long it takes you to recover, say, from deadlifts, or how long it takes you to recover from a front squat. So it's like you might be completely fine after doing deadlifts, but some people it absolutely taxes them for a couple of days. So then you need to know, right, do you put that at the end of the week, so then you've got then some extra days recovery time, or do you put them, say, towards the start of the week where you're at your freshest, where you hope you'll be able to recover better? So they're the considerations that you need to kind of maybe think about when you are looking at volume and intensity, as we, looking at that training history.
Yeah.
And go on. And then, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, you just reminded me of something where for volume and intensity, you should consider your age and training age as well, because if you're a very experienced and strong athlete and you're a bit older, you're in a different situation to somebody who's a complete newbie with no training age and very young. For example, the thing that made me think of it is when you're referring to deadlifts, if somebody is a really experienced powerlifter and they're very strong, when they do a deadlift session that is going to push the needle forwards and they're going to make them even stronger, that's very taxing. And if they're older, it might take them longer to recover and be able to deadlift again. I think it's Wendler or what's the guy who says do your fives?
Strength method.
One of the old school powerlifting guys. He deadlifts once every 2 weeks because for him to actually get stronger, his recovery time is slow. So you can't deadlift every week and actually make progress. So considering how old you are into your maximum recoverable volume is also a key consideration. And
also then on that one, you just made me think of something, is how strong you are dictates how long it's going to take for you to do your working set. So, we might, in our next point where we're going to go to, we're going to discuss obviously session structure, but is in what might take someone, say, 10 minutes to do a deadlift to their top set and do whatever they need. It might take someone else, say, 20 minutes to half an hour. And if they've only got an hour to train, that's then going to affect everything after that. So the training age and strength is so important. So really good point there. So as I touched on it just there, point number 5 is now diving into session structure. Now, obviously, just to touch on this with session structure, this is very individual, and for everyone's goals, it's going to have a very different look. But as focusing on our GPP style person that we've mentioned before throughout this episode, where you've got maybe, say, 3 days a week where you want to train and you want to make sure you've hit all your key components of all the movements, a basic session structure, so you get an idea to make sure you cover everything, is probably definitely starting with like a general and a specific warm up, and probably maybe some movement specific stuff for your main lift.
Yeah, spot on. So getting your body ready to train in the most time efficient way possible. If you had all the time in the world, doing 10 to 15 minutes cardio just to get the body temperature up, and then 30 minutes of movement mechanics is ideal, but not many people have that much time and they want to crack into the main work. So whatever's necessary to get your body feeling good and get your joints prepared for the work you're about to ask them to do. And then cracking into that section A piece, which is the main work that you're looking to progress over time. In that 3 day a week avatar, let's think about if you're going to train 3 times a week and you've got those 6 movements that you want to focus on, you're looking at doing 2 of them as a main piece in each session. So you cover all 6 across the week. And you're doing them first because that's when you're freshest, your skill, you're most likely to execute the skill well, and you can give it most effort. Like if you're a little bit more tired, you're not going to be able to progress the movement as well as if you're fresh. You're also not comparing yourself week to week in a fair state, because if you're, so for example, if you're squatting after you've done back work, it will have a slight, it'll steal some of your energy and you won't be able to give it everything you can. So you might think you're getting weaker, but it's actually not a fair comparison. So always trying to keep things as consistent as possible to keep that sort of scientific rigor when you're assessing your progress over time. And once you've done your main work, then you get like what I class as section B stuff. This is where you start to add in some accessory work. We're going to do a whole episode on accessory work because there's so much nuance to how you might pick your accessory exercises and program them. But for today's purposes, the simplest way is doing a single limb variation. So if you're trying to improve your squat, doing a single leg squat of some sorts would help improve your squat. Essentially, you're working on the limiter that prevents you from continuing to make progress by just hammering your main movement from section A. And this is where we can start to add in things like supersets just to be more efficient with our time and get a couple of different stimuli in about the same time it would take to just do one movement on its own.
Yeah, do you know, it's just as you were saying that, is actually making me think back, just because I don't know if it's because we're now a lot less, we're always looking for that instant gratification, that needing stuff now, that basically I can't really do single exercises anymore. I have to do supersets because I feel like if I'm doing, say, dumbbell chest press, I can't just do a dumbbell chest press, sit there for 60 seconds or something like that, and then think, I now pretty much, I'll even say do a row or something like that as a superset with it. So I'm doing a push and pull, not only one to save time, but also just keep intensity up, but also keep the mind ticking. Because I'm like, when you need to like rest and recover, I guess obviously as we've touched on before, and you understanding how much you need, taking an actual 60 seconds of just sitting there doing nothing, right? Is that actually resting? Or is you, when you're going for, say, a pull, say doing that, so you're doing the opposite to your muscle, so those pushing muscles are getting a form of active rest. So they're not just, say, in a way, imagine seizing up. So they're still moving, which goes to like, who was it? Was it Dorian Yates or something like that? Who used to say about getting a stretch in between. So like, say, doing like, say, chest press as an example, and then doing the chest stretch or something like that, which in my mind, that is just ultimate muscle damage. That's like taking it out and then just ripping it to shreds. But then you look at these bodybuilders, and obviously they have theories behind why they do things, and it clearly works. But you know, accessories and supersets make it saving yourself time. I think beyond that, also, it just keeps you wanting more, and it keeps you moving. So it keeps training fun. I think that's one of the massive point. But so obviously then going on to furthering point B into, say, point C would be extra accessories, and or that could just be like some like conditioning. That could be like if you're into CrossFit, maybe doing your Metcon at the end, or maybe you might just want to do something like even like some low intensity cardio as well. You know, there could be something that you just also wanted to just get a bit of aerobic work in there. Throwing it at the end if it's not your priority. And then having extra, if you've got the time, it's a really nice time to add in those extras, or also adding in your arm training as well, which is always essential.
Yeah, that's it. Like C for curls. The point around that section C stuff is that it's generally lower skill and it's the nice to have. So it's not essential, but it is a way of getting more volume in. So remember from last podcast, we talked about your volume over time needs to constantly be going up. So you can do that by intensifying. So your training stress needs to be going up. Let me be more specific. So if your training stress is going up, you can either do more volume or you can do more intensity, or both. And a way of packing in more work is after you've done the main intense stuff, is adding in bonus sets. So this is where you do your back off work and lower skill stuff to just get more work through the body, which means you actually increase your training load and can make more progress over time.
Beautiful. And then obviously cooling down, or for some that's then just then putting all your stuff away and then getting in the shower and doing whatever. So cooling down obviously is very individual and how some see fit. Two things on, say, this session structure, little hack that I like to tell people. So going back to, say, point A, when your warm up and stuff like that, before your session, say for instance you train at lunchtime, and so you train at 12 o'clock and you go, cool, okay, I've got 10 minutes before I can actually even start my warm-up. The warm-up a lot of the time is really good for you because it's changing your state. So it's getting you from seated into movement and getting the mind right ready to lift, right, and getting into the prep. So before any of that, if you're sitting at your desk, put on some music, turn it up a bit, maybe put on some training style music if you can, to, change your state, change your mood. So change the thing of, you're sitting there working away, getting a bit bogged down. You put on some gangster rap or something like that, quite a loud volume, it's going to change your mood. You're going to be, all right, cool, I'm now getting ready. So then when you get into your warm-up, it's going to be a lot less half-assed. You'll actually probably get through your warm-up quicker because you'll move better. So changing your state is so key when you're training, and especially when you're training from home. Yeah,
massively. I was literally about to move on to that. Is that something that I've had to learn to do since lockdown times, is that state change, because you are in the same space but you're trying to ask something very different of your body. So for me, it's literally that, like playing some loud music, moving the furniture out the way, and by the time one song's played, you feel completely different and you're ready to go. But those little hacks do make a huge difference in the current state of affairs.
Yeah, and I think that's my number one tip. If you don't want to train, or you can't be fucked, you're just feeling tired from the night before, music will instantly, put on a song that just makes you feel happy and just and if you want to go aggressive, be aggressive as well. It's completely down to you. But for me, I just put on, say, a certain genre of music, and it will normally just get me feeling quite good. Normally it's some Blink-182 or something like that, so stuff that take me back to being about 16. But then also it can be quite good to train to still. So rather than, say, if I listen to some country, which is going to be quite chilled and stuff, so that's not really going to get me in the mood to train. So just to recap that session structure, so obviously we want to start with that general specific warm-up. Then you're going to go into your main work where what you want to progress over time. Then you're going to go into your accessories of that main work. And then if you can, this is your bonus stuff where you're going to get your further accessories, your condition, or your low skill work, and then get into a form of cool down. So obviously, as we said, all depends on your individual goal, but that's why it's so important to make sure you've listened to episode 1 for a start, and make sure you know what your goal is, so you know that you're moving in the right direction.
Spot on. And I think that brings us nicely to the last point, which is to assess and refine the program over time. So you do need to give your program a chance, because one session doesn't necessarily tell you that it's working or it's not. So I'd advise generally 3 weeks minimum on the same program before you consider changing it, unless it's radically wrong and you can tell it's just it's way too much, or you're not feeling any improvement in that period of time. And I think one thing that some people don't like to hear is that actually changing too much is wrong and it isn't good for you. And a boring, consistent program is how you accumulate really significant gains. I think about, so anyone who's really strong has probably been doing the same or similar movements for a really long period of time. They haven't got there because they do a new squat variation every week. They've done the basics well with smart accessories, which have allowed the basic movements to continue to get better over time. And this is where the trade-off between enjoying the program and adhering to it versus having the perfect program, which is boring and consistent, but you actually don't stick to it because you don't find it fun. And I think it's a sad reality for most people. If you look at the highest achievers in sport, they're those people who are able to do the boring day in, day out, like Olympic weightlifters, golfers. The two that stick out in my mind, they are just happy to make the same thing interesting and fun again and again and again. Whereas if you're chopping and changing, your body doesn't know what you're trying to adapt to, and it doesn't, it can't adapt as quickly as if you have that consistent stimulus.
No, and I guess that's obviously where obviously like the perks of say CrossFit is, because that's where it's more like your GPP, where you're getting kind of better at everything at a steady pace and just moving through. You're not necessarily wanting to get better at something in a set amount of time, because that's why you'll notice after someone's been doing CrossFit for about a year or so, they go, I actually want to get better at weightlifting, or I want to get better at gymnastics. So they'll then do less of something else and do more weightlifting or do more gymnastics, because then they realize that if we're doing everything all the time, it's just going to take such a long time that they're not going to catch up with each other. So you're going to have to have a bit of a back seat while you focus on another area.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, to summarize that point, it's basically assess your progress and refine your program based on your progress. If it's working, maybe you can keep doing it. Maybe you can push a little bit harder. If it's not working, identify why it's not working. Are you training too much? Are you not training enough? Are you not recovering well? Those sorts of questions you've got to ask yourself, and then adapt and improve going forwards.
Nice. And I also went to, as an extra question, because I was talking to my clients about this episode in particular, and they just made me have the thought of, he was saying to me, he goes, but we was using an example, I said, cool, push, pull and all that, all right? So I was saying, what exercises are an example of them? He goes, surely like pushing, like, you're doing your bench press, and then you have like your strict press with a barbell. And I was like, and then you say, yeah, okay. So then beyond that, so a framework which you need to kind of make sure you're taking into consideration is within that push, pull, hinge, squat, rotate and locomotion, you've done a vertical version and a horizontal version. So as an example for the push and the pull. So, with a push, as I mentioned there, you've got bench press, you've got strict press, you've got the dumbbell variations, you've got all sorts of variations. With the pulling one, so, you've got pull down, you've got pull up, you've also got rows. So as an example, and there's many other horizontal and vertical goes with there. And same with the squat as well. It's like obviously you've got bilateral, you've got unilateral. So there's so much variation within all of this. And a point we haven't fully touched on here is also including like plyometric work into your training. So like because we often discuss about slowing things down with some tempo and, and trying to change stimulus there. But if your body's primed and ready enough to add in a little bit of plyometric work, it's a nice way to add in some variation either in your warm-up stage, priming that body to get yourself set, or also maybe just some fun accessories in the end when you're doing some extra work there.
Okay.
So, a little bit extra there. So, well, we hope you really got something from today, guys. As always, go back, listen to episode 1, 2, and 3 if you just want to really just refine some of this stuff. If you do want some more help on knowing a little bit more of the intricacies for your own personal training, do drop either of us a message. We'd be happy enough to help. And apart from that, if you did enjoy the episode, please do leave a review, share it with your friends and so forth. We really appreciate that. And as always, thank you for your time, and we'll catch you next week.
Cheers, guys.